Hi, this is Chris Sarandon, and welcome to Cooking by Heart, where we talk about the vivid memories of the food we grew up with and the people and the stories attached to that time in our lives. Tonight, my guest is Michael Patrick King. For all of its 6 seasons, King piloted the hit series HBO's Sex and the City, for which he won numerous Emmy and Golden Globe awards. And he acted as the writer, director, and producer of both blockbuster Sex and the City movies. He's also known for creating, executive producing, and directing another HBO series, The Comeback with Lisa Kudrow, named by Newsweek and Entertainment Magazine as one of the top 10 television series of the decade. In 2011, he created the hit sitcom Two Broke Girls with Whitney Cummings. And his most recent series, And Just Like That, a new chapter of Sex and the City, was HBO Max's most watched series ever, and is currently in production for its 2nd season. Michael Patrick King, welcome to Cooking by Heart. How are you, my friend?
Thank you, Chris. I am well, and I think you said that it was Cooking by Heart was a memory of what kind of food did you say?
The vivid memories of the food we grew up with.
Yeah,
and the people and the stories attached to that time in our lives. Well, so there's, it's a 2-parter.
No, I got it. And it's beautiful. Unfortunately, as you know by my name, Michael Patrick King, I'm Irish. So it might have to be adjusted to the bland memories of the food we grew up with.
So I'll change vivid.
And the people who didn't know how to cook that we remember in the early chapters.
Okay. All right. So what I'll do then.
Early chapters.
As you know, in the wonderful world of recording, we can go back and redo.
No, so why would you? The contrast is everything.
So what I usually start with, what I start with on this show is there's a word I like called provenance, which is kind of a highfalutin word for where we come from, right? Now, you come from Scranton, Pennsylvania, right? Born, bred, lived there for a good part of your life. What was Scranton like when you were growing up there?
Scranton is a former coal mining town where the coal all left.
Yeah,
so
we have that in common, by the way.
Yeah, right. What you have is an industrial sort of an industrial town filled with working class people, and I'm from a very, very working class family, Irish, American, 100% Irish on both sides. And
what did your parents do? Yeah,
my father had, when I was very young, my father had 2 jobs. He drove a beer truck and delivered coal, like to people's furnaces.
Yes.
And he would drive the truck up, put that chute into people's houses, and coal would get dumped down. And that was his very big job. And my mother, I have 3 sisters, and my mother, when we were a certain age, went back to her job, which was running a Krispy Kreme. She ran a Krispy Kreme in Scranton, Pennsylvania. She was the manager and the counter and the book person.
Wow. I had no idea that Krispy Kreme went back to ancient times in Scranton, Pennsylvania.
It did. Yes, people used to wear their togas in and get a coffee and a glaze. I'm not that old, you bitch. But it was definitely back in the early 60s. And the interesting thing is most people think of Krispy Kreme as a Southern franchise because it's out of North Carolina.
Right.
But there was one franchise in Pennsylvania in Scranton, and it was run by this man named Joe Adcroft. And my mother was his right hand everything. Mm-hmm. And she hired every one of my sisters to work in the donut shop, but she did not hire me because I don't think she wanted to get involved with that much drama and donuts. For some reason, I was excluded from that.
Were you a drama hazard at that time in your life?
I think I was a very dramatic kid. She was, unfortunately, not a good cook.
Yeah.
And our food consisted of potatoes and boiled potatoes and mashed potatoes. And my father had a tendency to drink. And on Sundays after church, all the bars were closed, except for the back door was open so people could go into the bars. And I would have to go. It would be like 2:00 and it would be time for Sunday afternoon dinner. And I was told to call my father down at the bar and he wouldn't come home right away. And this is very vivid, but I do remember my mother crying into the potatoes and then serving them to us.
A little extra salt.
A little extra salt.
Just a pinch.
Just a potent pinch
soup
of
song.
Sadness.
Right.
Just a soup song of sadness, if you're going to go alliteration. But, it was like, it was potatoes and pot roast and meatloaf. And very, very
gray,
very by rote. In fact, I never had an actual uncanned vegetable until I grew up and was an adult. Never had a fresh piece of broccoli. Never had a green bean that didn't come out of a can. So to me, food was mostly just fuel, which is a very interesting way to think about fuel as you get on the other side of a certain mentality. Like, oh yeah, you don't need a lot of food. You just need fuel. But at that point, it was just, you eat this because you're hungry.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's, at some point there will be a pill.
Yeah.
Just pop it and go on your merry way. But in the meantime, you didn't have that luxury. You were sitting at home. What was the dinner table like? Was there conversation?
I think not. I think the conversation was, did you do your homework? Is your homework done? It wasn't like I have friends like you and other Mediterranean people who the food was like everything. Like you would sit around the table and eat and talk and discuss your days. That didn't happen. My father and mother were both very tired, very lovely, but very tired.
Well, they were.
I remember the goal was to eat as fast as possible.
Get the hell out of there. Yeah.
Yeah. Not just because what else is there to do at table? And I remember my mother saying, you have to eat. And at one point when I started to become myself and I was doing, I was in high school and I was doing a college theater production of Three Penny Opera. I got cast in high school to be in this college summer production. I remember I had to get to rehearsal and my mother said, you're not leaving this house until you eat dinner. And there was a boiled potato on the plate. And I cut it in half because I didn't want to be late. And I ate half the potato without chewing it. And I remember it went into my throat.
I know that feeling.
Like a lump.
Right.
And I remember it screaming, but it coming out like a trombone that has a hood on it, just like, wow, when the potato finally went down.
It was jettisoned.
It was
right?
Literally, my desire to not be late for theater was bigger than my survival skill. And you know what? It still is. I'm much more interested in being in time for theater than I am for my esophagus.
Really?
Yeah. Still,
so
food
surprised.
is something I have to slow myself down with. I really have to calibrate my energy down to enjoy a meal this day.
It's perfectly understandable given the description you just gave me of what meals were like at home. But were there no highlights? Were there holidays? What about holidays?
Yes, of course. Holidays were magical.
Yeah.
Turkey, mashed potatoes, gravy,
right.
Sitting around for the holiday. Turkey's mashed potatoes, gravy. Beautiful, comforting, lovely, family, prayer. Always said grace, though. Even though we were fast, we always said grace.
Regardless of the meal.
Regardless of the meal. Always
holiday
said grace.
Or not.
Holiday, every night, grace. We always gave thanks for this meal, which we were about to receive.
Through Christ our Lord, right.
Through Christ our Lord, amen. Whether it was good or not, we were giving thanks for it. And, the fact of the matter is truly, food it wasn't negligent from my parents. It just wasn't, it wasn't a skill set that their people had. They didn't really think about bread.
Well, and also, this is a theme that comes up, believe it or not, often in my conversations with people, that dinner was a pro forma kind of thing. And that mom was, and this is particularly with mothers who worked. very specifically with mothers who worked. I mean, I've talked to some people who have said, oh, yeah, well, mom was at home, but she just wasn't interested in food. But generally speaking, it's the mothers who were working. It's another job. You're coming home and then you've got to turn around and create something for, in your case, 5 people.
Yeah.
6, including her.
Yeah.
It was drudgery.
And also, you said the word create. Create really wasn't even in the mix. It was the repertory company of things that you already knew how to do. It's Tuesdays, so it's Swiss steak. And the fact of the matter is, aside from the exhaustion, and I don't know how many other people talk about this, there was a fear of food in my house, a fear of the unknown. To this day, I'm the only one in my family who has an adventurous spirit when it comes to food. And I only have that adventurous spirit because of my partner, Craig, who, but there was never fish in our house unless it was a fish stick. And you can imagine how unspecial that is. So there's a fear of, like, I don't know what that is, so I don't want to try it. That was inherent in not just my immediate family, but a lot of my ancestors. They did not enjoy the exploration of the unknown. They were fear-based when it came to food, which is, when you think about it, I guess it's just because there wasn't a lot of variety available to them. So they became very conditionalized.
Right.
You're from like seafood and grapes and gourds and, you're from like Flemish paintings of tables, your people.
Yes, to a certain extent. And there was also the variety when I was growing up, because not only did I eat at home, and at home it was Greek food almost exclusively, but at the restaurant, the variety was endless.
Wow.
And there were freshly made desserts, there were pies, there were cakes, there were puddings, so that when I ate at the restaurant once a week, all during the week, because my dad would change shifts. And when he was on the evening shift, my mom and I would go to the restaurant and I could have it whatever I wanted. So it was a real kind of, a potpourri of delights. But the conversation didn't exist. The conversation was about the food. It wasn't about current events or, what's going on at school. Nobody showed any interest. I'm also interested, did you ever go out? Did the family go out on occasion?
We had very little money. And so that was an expense that was reserved for your first communion.
Mm-hmm.
After your first communion, you would go there was a restaurant called the Castle Restaurant, where the kings would go. We would go to the castle.
Right.
And it was a breakfasty thing because you didn't eat before your first communion, so you could go and have there. I do remember Mother's Day, going out for ham and eggs. It felt very much about like that brunch thing before it was brunch. Easter.
Yeah.
Like, even though ham was at home, we would go out for breakfast, but there wasn't an enormous amount of money to spend at restaurants. And I'm not saying that the restaurants were even that expensive, but I'm telling you, there was not enough money for that. You could stretch potatoes really far.
Right. And
potato pancakes, that's another thing that it just came to me. They're not bad, potato pancakes. You take your mashed potatoes.
Yeah, right.
The tear-stained mashed potatoes, right? So those tears can last for up to 2 to 3 days, I believe, before they...
the high salinity mashed potatoes. Yeah.
Yes. Good if eaten before this day, these tears.
The expiration date.
But they would make those into round almost loaves, and then they would powder with flour, and then put them on a griddle, and then put butter on top of them. I do have a very exotic memory from my grandmother. She would make something called toast on the stove. They had a wood-burning stove in the kitchen, and she would take the iron circle off
Right.
and put a piece of bread on the fork like a tong through the thing.
Like
and
a marshmallow.
hold it like a marshmallow, but it would go through and hold the whole piece of bread and stick the bread over the flame.
The open flame?
The open flame. So it would get very, very charred in a great way. And then she'd flip it over. And then she would put butter on it and then sprinkle sugar on it. And that was called toast on the stove. But it was really from my Grammy because fire was involved. And fire was involved.
Right.
And so that was a great, exotic, special treat from my Grammy. And also in her yard, which we later moved into this house. My sister still lives in the house my mother was raised in.
This was Grammy's house.
This is Grammy's house.
Yeah.
She had in her backyard a whole wall of blackberry bushes.
Oh.
And I do remember going out there and picking bowls of blackberries and coming in and washing them and having them put them in a bowl with cream and, of course, sprinkled sugar. So that's as organic as we got in turn. And that's pretty organic.
Right.
Even now, as I speak of it, it's the opposite of the color I was painting 10 minutes ago about my family. That feels farm to table in our backyard.
Those are the words were coming out of my mouth just as you said them.
Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting because my Grammy was really kind of like a magical creature. Like she would make toast on the stove and she had blackberries and she actually would, she once went out and took a clothes pole, that stick that holds the drying clothes from hitting the ground.
Yep.
Because I was being teased and she chased a bunch of boys away who were bullying me with the clothes pole. So she was kind of massively
protective.
Charismatic.
Yeah. Protective.
Almost
and
like
influential
borderline witch / fairy. I mean, she was very Grammy Fitzsimmons, very.
Was that was your mom's maiden name? Fitzsimmons?
My Fitzsimmons, yeah. And now that I think about it, my mother was from a farm, but she fell far from the tree. Apparently, there was a farm and all that. And my grandfather, her father, drove a bread truck, fresh bread. So he delivered bread around from a bakery. So,
but he wasn't he wasn't a baker. He was a delivery guy.
Delivery guy.
Any experiences with the bread, with his other than the bread that she grilled?
No, not really.
Did he bring day old bread home? Did he leave it?
I don't really remember. Yeah. I do remember day old donuts. I mean, there was, day old donuts and special prices of day old donuts. And the other interesting thing about the donuts is
Krispy Kreme.
Krispy Kreme.
Krispy Kreme. Yeah.
For Cub Scouts, they would do a donut sale, like the way Girl Scouts did cookies. And my mother was like the donut czar. I mean, she really facilitated that. And in the middle of that thing, I would walk into the dining room, and the dining room would be like the last scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark, that storeroom, that piles and piles. I would walk through aisles of boxes of donuts that Cub Scouts were coming to pick up to deliver, like boxes. As a matter of fact, when I came home from school on any day, I would know my mother was there because there would be powdered sugar footprints on the dining room rug. That coming in, I would see she was there because she'd come from the bakery and walk through and I would see the footprints first and know that she was home because of that.
Oh, what a wonderful image.
Yeah.
You got to use it. You got to use it somewhere or sometime.
Sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. So was your Grammy the one? I'm also interested, when we're growing up, that there's often, particularly when you have a situation where your parents are not necessarily communicating with you in any way, shape, or form, that you're basically, you're the kid. Yes. As I was growing up, it was kids are to be seen but not heard. Was there a person who saw you, who really saw you? Who was the first person who really saw you?
I would say my mother. really saw me.
Yeah.
And maybe what she saw scared her.
How
So
so?
maybe she looked at, oh, well, I was a curious child, clearly a sissy,
Yeah.
clearly somebody. I was putting on religious epics in the backyard. I would dress my sisters up in her wedding gown and bridesmaids dresses and make shows. So they clearly saw me. What they didn't know what to do with me is the
Right.
thing, I think. The first person who got me, really got me,
Yeah.
was this woman in this production that I was in that college production.
The college
where
production. Right.
Yeah, and it was the woman who was playing Pirate Jenny in Three Penny Opera, and she was even old. She was like, I would say she must have been 40. Like she was the professional. And for the first time, her name was Ruth Judd, and she was exotic. She was Jewish, intellectual, very Ruth Gordon in theory. I didn't know who Ruth Gordon was, but she was very Ruth Gordon. Got my sense of humor as an adult. I didn't even know, like, you know how suddenly all of a sudden you're in the group with people and they get you and you're 17 and they're 40 and all of a sudden they see you.
Yep.
And I often think about her, what she must have seen and how she delicately sort of opened this like PBS tote bag world to me. Like she would invite me to her apartment to her house, her half a house where she lived with her husband, James, and they would invite me to dinner and they would make food I had never seen. They would drink things like ginger beer. I was like, my father drank real beer.
Right.
I didn't know what ginger beer was.
Right.
There was homemade bread. There were salads. Very bizarre. Challah.
Yes.
But rugs, like Oriental rugs and carved wood bowls and paintings and PBS on the television in the kitchen and record albums with comedy records and Nichols and May and that whole world that they sort of included me. Coffee. They would drink like coffee. And it's the first time I'd ever seen the Melita thing with the filter, with the hot water and into the cup.
The drip. Yeah.
The drip. I'd never seen anything like that. It was like a percolator or nothing. And so the exotic sort of specialness of who she was and the smell of her house and the good soaps at her sink. And it was really like a different world, almost like a different color palette, like jewel tones and darks and woods.
But also the feeling that this is where I belong.
Yeah. This is where I belong, and I didn't even know it.
Yep. Exactly.
And the sponge of it all, I would assume, to be 17 and just soaking all this up. And I remember it used to make my mother crazy.
Yeah.
And she would call and say, can you send Michael home? Now, I don't know what she thought was happening.
Like you'd been captured.
Or captivated or messed with. But the idea that I had another world to go to threatened my mother as much as fish. You know what I mean? Threatened like too exotic.
Yeah.
What is that? I don't know what to do with that. So, and she'd go, what are you doing over there? And I would go, we're talking. That blew her mind because I wouldn't even think about that until suddenly I was doing it. But she was very special. And she, even when I went away to college, if I came to town, she would find a restaurant for us to go have lunch with. That. find a restaurant.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to this restaurant. And it'd be like, okay. And that was an epiphany. And the next, there's like been a couple food epiphanies. The next one I had, and it was really stunning, was I was in New York. I was 22. No, I was 21. I was waiting on tables at a restaurant called Rusquet's on the Upper West Side.
Yeah, I remember Rusquet's.
It was a good restaurant.
Yeah.
Very fancy.
Yeah, yeah.
Ish. Casual, fancy,
Magical.
special,
But it was also an actor artist hangout.
Artist hangout.
Yeah.
So I worked a graveyard shift, which meant from 10 o'clock at night till 6 in the morning. And at 6 in the morning, we would lock the doors. It was a 24-hour restaurant, except for 6 to 8, it was closed.
Yeah.
In the morning. And we would have a family meal. The waiters.
Right.
And one day,
staff meal.
Staff meal at 6 o'clock in the morning, somebody brought out from the kitchen a bowl of green spaghetti. And I tossed a pesto, which I had never heard of or seen.
Mm-hmm.
And I ate that and I was in heaven. And to this day, I will chase pesto. And it's a direct link to the surprise of that moment.
Yes.
Where I was like, what is that? It's green spaghetti. I didn't know it was probably linguine or whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
But the taste of it was an explosion that I had never had before. The cheese, the pine nuts, the very abstract taste of pesto, basil, and garlic. Right. I didn't know what that was, but I was hooked. I was no longer afraid of that. It was a very significant moment.
And by extension, you were no longer afraid of trying things that were exotic, that were not necessarily related. Yeah.
Because I moved to New York when I was, I went to college I was one of those kids who went to college at 17 because I was that early. I was a September kid.
Right.
So when I left home for college, I was 4'11". When I came home my first year, I was 5'10.5". I grew almost a foot my first year of college.
Extraordinary. Yeah.
It's
not unusual, but extraordinary.
It was pretty shocking. Because, I mean, if you look at the spiritual, emotional manifestation of the minute I stepped away from my house, I was allowed to grow.
Yes.
So when I went to New York, I was now growing as a person. And here comes pesto, and I'm not afraid of it at all.
Right. I have a question that I'm going to go back a little bit to, but then I want to follow this line of conversation. And that is that you were an altar boy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Was that an escape, or was that something that you felt was necessary in order to immerse yourself further in the life of your family and of your people, as it were? Or was it a spiritual thing?
Listen, being an altar boy, I had my feeling about Catholicism is directly linked to my mother's feel. I almost said fear. There you go. That's Freudian.
Yeah. Interesting.
My mother's feel about Catholicism, which is Blessed Mother based. It's almost the brand. She chose the brand she wanted, which was the Blessed Mother, the Holy Family, the love Catholicism. Not the crucified Christ on the cross bleeding. Like, that wasn't her MO. She leaned into the love, the heart, the bleeding heart, still the heart of Jesus and Mary and the family. She was it's almost the heathen version of Catholicism, almost the female version, the Game of Thrones-y version, like where you have a goddess and you follow that.
Well, it was in a way the way that Christianity was based, particularly as it came out of Easter, because Easter was a pagan holiday, and Easter
Yeah.
was about birth.
Yeah.
It was about the entities that give birth,
Yeah.
not the death of Christ.
No, it was about the flowers on the cross rather than the cross.
Yeah.
But the reality is, when I'm from the very end of the old Catholic Church, like the Latin, when the church was a mystery, and it was, you were invited to watch, but you weren't asked to participate except silently in your head while people were praying. So I had all that pageant and like Holy Thursday night, that incense and all the little flower girls throwing petals and the altar boys carrying the crosses and the magnificent order and pageantry where like we would practice and the nuns would have a clicker and they would have it hidden in their hand and you would hear click, click, and then you all genuflected at the same time and stood up. So there was this ridiculous opera.
Right.
And we were all the supernumeraries. We were like the show.
But it was choreographed.
It was choreographed and it was magnificent and it was filled with magic.
Yep.
Like it left such a blank that you could fill in because you didn't know anything. And it was music and smoke and scents and flowers and nighttime. And it was the mystery of it. That was the word that was on the tip of my tongue. I was an altar boy as well. Sure. Right. And the same world. Yeah. Yeah.
The
same Latin.
But this was Greek or in my case, we had a polyglot kind of congregation. So there were Syrians, there were Russians. So there were all kinds of exotic languages flying around. Yeah. But then on particularly Easter week, Friday night, and Saturday night, the knocking on the door of the church with the catafalque of pallbearers carrying the tomb, carrying the coffin, knocking on the door, and the people on the other side answering. It was just, it was great theater. Great theater. And on Holy Thursday, I was just talking to my sister Eileen about this. On Holy Thursday, after our ceremony at like 7:30 to 9, we would get in our cars and drive around. Because, a Holy Thursday is like lilies and the altar and the monstrance is out, the big gold thing holding the host. So it was like the Vegas of Christmas, like on Easter. Everybody was like, look at this. This is our version. And then you would drive around in your car to look at other people's churches. And Eileen said to me, you had to do that. You had to visit 3 other churches. And I just thought we were doing it as the Great Vegas Tour. But I loved going in and seeing how somebody else displayed the monstrance and what their church looked like. So number one, to answer your question, hooked. Yes. Hooked in the theater, hooked in the magic, hooked in the ritual. So of course I wanted to be part of it because my big joke was the very first Mass I was asked to serve or given to serve was 5 o'clock in the morning, dark, 2 people in the church, an old Italian woman and some old man, and me and the priest. And I asked my mother to come and take pictures. And she said, I don't think your heart's in the right place. You know what I mean? Because I literally wanted to be on the altar. And I actually had this identity where I actually was competing in my mind with other altar boys. It's like, I'm the holiest. Yes. I'm the one who has invisible wings. Right. That no one else can see. Yes. I'm the holiest. So it's this weird combination of competitive ego, knowing I was cute and adorable, wanting to be on stage. Look, I'm on the stage. You're in the audience. I'm on the stage. And then Chris, I just finished this big piece of work and I'm talking still about the feeling of being in a church when no one's there. And
there is that part of me too, where I would be lighting the candles in the morning when it was dark.
Yes.
And I felt that I could, if I looked at the statues long enough, that they would look back at me.
Yes.
And I would get so sure that was going to happen that I would break the gaze and get out of there because I didn't want that engagement. Mm-hmm. And people don't know this, but one of our you and I's primary artistic connection is I wrote a play where I wrote a play called Thorn, and Bloom, and Joanna, your magnificent actress wife, was the star of the other one, but you were the star of the first one, where a Hollywood TV writer invites Jesus to lunch at a Hollywood restaurant to come out to him.
Yes.
And you were my Jesus.
Yeah.
And I still to this, and by the way, everybody, if you're going to have a Jesus, get Chris Sarandon. Because he's believable and hilarious. It's very rare to get a Jesus that feels like Jesus and yet knows how to do a joke. You can get Jesus actor, but you can't get Jesus actor / somebody who understands comedy. And that's you.
Yeah.
But I'm still to this day mining whatever that was in me.
And was it, were you mining it early in your career? I know you started when you first came to New York. When you first came to New York, you were a baggage handler.
Yeah. My first job at 20, I quit college because I thought, I'm in the theater department, and the only reason to stay is to get a teaching degree in case it doesn't work out. And I thought to myself, well, if it doesn't work out, no one's going to hire me to teach theater from this college. I mean, it will only be because I became something that I would want to teach or be hired to teach. Anyway, so I came in the first job. The only connection I had in New York was I had a cousin who worked at Greyhound as a bus driver because I'm glamorous. And I actually got a job. My only connection that I ever used in any capacity to move ahead was I got a connection at Greyhound, and I got off the bus at the Port Authority at 11 a.m., put my luggage in a locker, and went downstairs to start unloading the buses at 3 p.m. And I vowed, even though where I'm from is 2.5 hours away, I vowed to myself that I would not leave the city for 3 months, no matter how bad it got, because it would have been too easy. And I literally was like a Dickens character. I was covered in exhaust.
Oh, I'm sure.
Handing people their luggage like, take me with you. Please help
please,
me.
Sir. Please, sir.
Rescue me from my own dream of being a performer.
Right.
This is have you got a little something for me? An escape route, maybe. But, oh my God. Yeah. So I started.
And by the way, folks, those of you who are listening, Michael and I both lived in New York at a time when that part of town was a kind of Armageddon.
A war zone?
It was a war zone. It was the worst place, one of the worst places in America.
What's interesting now is people keep talking about New York City right now, and they're also talking about Los Angeles, where I currently live, and I'm leaving to go to New York next week again for 8 months. But people are talking about the cities that I live in as though they're bad. And I keep saying to people, well, yeah, but it's not the end story. There will be maybe, hopefully, a shift. Because when we were in New York in the 70s and 80s, I mean, I used to eat my lunch at the Port Authority, looking out the window, watching, pardon me if you have kids, hookers, service guys in cars on 11th Avenue in front of everybody at night. So, I mean, it was raw. Yeah.
It was nasty, nasty time. But then you moved on. Interestingly, you moved into food. You were a waiter for a long time.
Waiter forever.
And by the way, too, for those of you who are listening, I think that we live in a time when young performers expect things to happen immediately.
Oh my God.
So they go to Los Angeles primarily, but they also go to New York, thinking that I'm going to be a star overnight or my life is over. And Michael, you stuck it out for how many years?
I went to New York
As
at
a
20.
handler and a waiter and a,
Yeah,
yes.
I went to New York at 20, and I still didn't quite have my rent every month when I was 38. So that's 18 years
18
of
years.
enormous lack of validation financially.
Were you performing at all?
Constantly. I did everything. And when I tell people now, and I talk to a lot of writers and a lot of performers, and I say, here's the thing, everybody has their own path. But what you cannot do is expect it to happen. You can't wait 18 years for it to happen.
Yes.
You have to be making everything happen every day, and maybe it will happen after 18 years. Or if you're lucky, you know, my other joke about New York is my experience of people that I know who went to New York, you either get something right away,
yes,
or you have to wait 10 years.
I was lucky like that. I got a soap opera as soon as I got to New York.
Yeah, because you believe that you're still talented. Like you believe you're talented, and then you get it, and that is magnifying what you already have. But New York can knock you over, and then you have to doubt yourself. And once you start doubting yourself, it's very hard to just sort of grab the ring because you're so busy pulling yourself up to grab the ring. So I did everything I could. I think it's very important to shapeshift. And for me, I thought I was going to go to New York and be at 20 and be introducing Michael Patrick King in a movie. Like he's so young. Yep. We have to introduce him because there's no way you could have seen him. He was just born 2 days ago in a field. We just discovered this magical actor. Yeah. And, you know, 38. At the age of 38, I went to Hollywood as a writer. But all the way through there, I was trying everything I could. I worked in every restaurant. I worked in every off Broadway for no money. And I finally started writing plays and sketches. And that started to be the thing. And I was like, oh, I'm a writer. That's it. That's when lightning started to... I call it the green lights. That's when the lights started turning green, like go that way, comedy, writing. But yeah, it's a long journny.
But you have to have the clarity of vision and of purpose to know when the light goes green to go.
Oh yeah. But I don't even think you need the clarity of a vision as much as you need an undying, unexplained belief that you have something special to share. It's unexplicable. If you're looking for proof from outside, you'll never get it.
Yep.
But to keep going when no one is saying yes, but you think, I'm not going to quit. I didn't have a clear path. Well, I'll be an actor for 4 years and then I'll do comedy and then I just kept going. What is it? What is it? What is it? And you have to have a mad drive. When I was a waiter at Rusky's and I worked all night long, I would go home. Oh, here's another magical story. My friend Sarah was the pastry chef and she came in when I left in the morning and I would go home and sleep from like 7 to 11. And when I wake up, she would have finished her baking and there would be scones with butter and jam wrapped in aluminum foil stuck in the window grate of my basement front apartment.
Oh.
On her way home, she would drop those off. So I would go out and there would be these almost hot scones, freshly made with butter and jam for my breakfast. But I would get up and then I would think I'd be like exhausted because I had 4 hours sleep, but I had to get up because I had to make it. Abstract. And then it would be like 2:30 and I'd be like, I am so tired. And I would say to myself, if you take this nap, you're not going to make it. If you take this nap, you are not going to make it.
Yep.
And then I would, of course, fall asleep. But the drive has to be bigger than the proof that you have anything. And, you know, it's either sometimes true or sometimes diluted.
Yeah.
But if there's no other way, that's the way.
It's a calling. You
It's
are called. You are called to service.
You're called to realize some part of yourself that
to serve yourself, or
that only you feel but don't even understand needs to be recognized. And then when you're able to get in the right lane or the right wind, you can start to realize, oh, everything was about this. Everything was this. Now I can put this in and that in and take that and put that in the writing. And then, but it also comes with cleaning up who you are personally. You can't be, in my case, I was in the closet for a very long time. So I was pushing everything away, and it's a whole symphony of
a Roman Catholic young gay man.
Yes. The only son of a beer truck driving, baseball playing, John Wayne looking man.
I'm interested in the connection between, because you ended up, I mean, the expression of who you are came to fruition with Sex and the City.
Yeah.
In that it allowed you to do what? How did it allow you to express yourself in ways that not only had you not expressed yourself, but that the world had not seen expressed on television?
Okay. Well, number one, the idea, the main calling card, and why the show became so dynamic at first is because of the word sex. No one had really tried to be funny about sex. So the idea for me, after all this Catholicism, all this hiding, all this repression, self-repression and societal repression, that I was now able on a pay cable channel to let it rip and use my comedy head to talk about shame was the magic for me. It was the just add water and stir. I'm allowed to make fun of my shameful feelings around sex. So that's number one. I knew that it was thrilling and completely green. No one had even been in that pasture yet. No one had even put a tool into that soil. So that was good. And number two, it was refreshing for me because I was coming from the network, where everything in network television that I would hand them was always too complicated and too big and too. And I'm not saying I'm a big, complicated thinker. I'm saying they weren't looking for what I was saying.
They're looking for common. They're looking for common denominator.
They're looking for a simple. They think they're looking for simple.
Right.
And so now I get to cable, HBO, especially not just cable. These two people, Carolyn Strauss and Chris Albrecht, who ran HBO, they were like, go. And I felt like a dog that was, on those big leashes on the backyard. They don't even know they're on a leash. I was on a leash, but I was running like crazy. And it just actualized something. And the third thing was women. I have three sisters.
Yeah, that's where I was going. Yeah.
Yeah, I have three sisters. I love my sisters. People always say, well, I guess you could write the show because you're gay. And I sometimes think, or because I like women.
And
I think of women.
Yeah.
I think of women as my friends.
Yeah.
Because my best friends were my three sisters. I never saw them as others. And because I was gay, I never thought of them as objects or women in general as objects.
Right.
I thought of women as friends. And so for me to be writing characters that I understood and could imagine and use parts of myself and know that I could also make fun of all of our insecurities about sex, all of us, and show things. And also, the final magic of that show for me as a writer was that it was about outsiders. Single people were outsiders still. Society was like, you get married at a certain age or you're wrong. Right. So if you translate that to you marry a woman or you're wrong, I'm right in the right wheelhouse to be talking about the anarchy of tearing down societal norms about relationships.
And you had them in a setting that was very allowing of that paradigm to be expressed, in that it's New York City. It's where everybody goes to change. It's where everybody goes to be somebody else.
Yep. And also, it was a window of New York that was not dangerous. And I mean, the city became more like the show after the show came on than it was when we were imagining it. Yeah. It actually started to become part of a personality where people started coming expecting that experience, and therefore it manifested. Yeah. But it was just a really perfect zeitgeist moment. Yeah. The city was right there and was really still exciting. And the other thing is, I think something becomes a hit if the characters are saying something just as you're thinking it, or a week before you say it. Yeah. So you're like,
it's there. Right. It's there in the audience.
It's there, but
it's waiting.
No one has said it.
It's waiting. Yeah.
It's the moment whose time has come. Everybody's thinking this. Yes. All of a sudden, these characters are saying it, and it's exciting because nobody said it, but it's not like you're saying things from Mars where people are not acknowledging that it exists. You have to be saying the truth.
Yeah. These are things that everybody goes through, not only women.
No.
We all go through embarrassing moments in sex.
Of sex.
We all go through, exactly.
Sex and love and shame and thing. And the fun thing about it is, like, I wrote them in too. So it's like, to me, it's a full conversation about sexuality and individuals and people. When they rethink the show, they sort of replayed in their minds that it's really about all these women wanting to find love and wind up married. And the DNA of the show is the most important relationship you have is the one you have with yourself. And that's the only thing I ever write, really.
Yes. Yes. And interesting also to me, just coming from this conversation, is that a lot of the show takes place with these women eating.
Yeah, of course. Oh, yeah. I mean, talk about full
circle. Yeah.
I mean, once the show became a hit, I could get into any restaurant in the city, first of all, to eat, because they would want to be on the show. But then we were filming in every restaurant in the city.
And you were making places famous.
And then, of course, the joke is, once you film someplace, you never want to go there again. Because, I would have writing rooms in the kitchen. Right. We'd be doing scripts in the kitchen because television schedule is demanding. So while they're filming, we're in the kitchen, and you're like, well, I never want to come here. I know what the kitchen looks like. But what's really great is, I used to work at a restaurant called The Saloon, and it was actually the last restaurant I worked at. And it was across the Lincoln Center, and it's pretty famous because the waiters used to be on roller skates outside. Oh. Now, I was an inside waiter, and one of the great stories about The Saloon was I was what you call an AM versus a PM, and the PM waiters were the night waiters, and the PM waiters came in as though they were stars.
Yes.
And the AM waiters were their servants. And so there was this hierarchy of the changeover between the AMs and the PMs, and everybody would be so fueled. And we actually filmed an episode at the Saloon when Carrie went back, because we had done an episode where Carrie had an abortion, and the waiter that got her pregnant worked at the Saloon, and she was curious about the Saloon. And I sat as the executive producer looking at monitors at the same tables where I sat folding the napkins for the PMs. And I was like, oh, this is such a great connection to be sitting in this exact same table, in this exact same chair many years later, where I was at this place. And that is the restaurant where there was a manager who was brutal. Actually, my first pilot I ever wrote was called Hell. And it was a show about 5 waiters working in a restaurant in Hell's Kitchen. And it was about how you become friends with people when you're in hell. And this manager of this restaurant was so evil that I created an entire show around him.
Oh, wow.
But at one point they said, it was Christmas time, and they had put this note out that said, whoever doesn't work their shifts on Christmas, even if they get a replacement, has the pleasure of effing firing themselves. And I was like, what? And the tables used to be covered in butcher paper. So I wasn't going to work on Christmas. I had to get home for some turkey and potatoes. So I actually wrote on this butcher paper, I have had the pleasure of effing firing myself. I've had the pleasure of effing firing myself, put it over the time clock and walked out. Legend. Years later, I met someone as you're the one who effing fired themselves on the butcher paper. Yes.
Right.
But I would actually, speaking of drive, I would only work in a restaurant 3 months and then walk out the door because I wasn't going to be a waiter. Even if I walked to a different restaurant.
Yes, right. Psychologically. Makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Gotta get out of here.
Now, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you to repeat a story that my wife, Joanna, told me you tell about a catering incident.
Well, there's so many. But I did wait on Ruth Gordon at a dinner party once.
Oh, well, that redeems you in my eyes.
It redeems me. I was the only waiter. There was a woman named Marilyn Salinger who was very big in CBS News.
I remember
She
her.
lived on Central Park South.
Yep.
She had one of those kind of fancy apartments, and I was there to serve and turn the green beans on. Like I was going to make the green beans.
That was it.
So I sort of that, and to open the door and let people in. And so it was Garson Kanan and a bunch of fancy people.
Right.
And they said, Ruth Gordon may be coming down from upstairs. She lived in the building, but she isn't feeling well. And I was like, okay. So I'm getting them all sat, and I've got the green beans on, and I poured the wine, and all of a sudden I hear ding dong, and I go down the hall to the table, and I open the door from the table, and I open the door, and Ruth Gordon's there. She's about this 4 foot tall, in a black velvet mini dress, and she's got her hair with a big bow, and she goes, "Who the hell are you?" And I said, "I'm Michael. I'm the waiter." She goes, "Well, aren't you something?" She said, "Come here. I want you to go in the kitchen and get me a hard back chair, not a soft chair, but a hard back chair, the hardest one you can find, and bring it to me." So she went in, and I brought her the hard back chair, and she grabbed my arm and she said, "This is like that movie where the famous Russian star is talking to the cute Serbian servant." I mean, it was magical. And I'm doing the dishes, and it was them talking about the movies and how all the movies now aren't any good. And they're just all machines, and there's no heart, and there's no soul. And Ruth Gordon says, "I don't know. Have you seen the latest Star Wars? It's fantastic." And I thought to myself, and that's why she's young.
Yes. Was always young. Was young when she was
alive.
old. Yeah.
Old and young. Still like, what's up? I'm going to see everything. I'm not going to get in an old paradigm. And what I learned from her is like, anytime I'm at a conversation and I hear people my age now saying, "Oh, the movies are so terrible," I always think about Ruth looking at something and going, "But have you seen this?" So that was special. Many.
Very special. That's wonderful.
I was also a servant for a family in East Hampton.
Oh, yeah.
I was the houseboy for a family in East Hampton in the summer and had to serve people like Kurt Vonnegut. And it was like, I didn't know from food. And here I was serving food, and they created an outfit for me. I lived there. My outfit was, she said, Michael, we have to take, they were young. They were like probably 38. I was 20, 38 and 40. And they had a lot of money, and they lived right on the beach in this big mansion. And they took me shopping. And my outfit was white jeans, a red and white striped shirt, and clogs. I look like the guy on the Cracker Jack box. And I had a red and white shirt and a blue and white shirt.
Sailor boy.
I would serve the food that the cooks had made.
But you had to have that outfit on.
I had to have that outfit on.
Oh, Michael. At this point, we could continue talking for days.
I just want to say in my benefit, in
my
defense,
yes,
that now I eat everything. And the reason I do is because my partner, Craig, who we've been with 21 years, the first time I went on vacation with him in Mexico, I heard him say to his friends who we were with twice, Michael doesn't eat that. Michael doesn't eat that. And I thought, that is so not hot. So Michael started to eat that.
And now?
I started eating fish and sushi and everything. I just overruled my entire background because I thought, do you want to be the person that you love, another man, has to say, Michael won't eat that. Michael's afraid of vegetables. And I just broke my whole patterning. And so now I'm
in a way you were like Ruth. You were able to reset at a time in your life when you were not, when you were, settled and this is the way things are now, and move on. And that's what we all have to do. Yeah.
And can you imagine if I went through life not tasting shrimp? Can you imagine if I didn't know what sushi was? Can you imagine if I was afraid of food? There's so many other things to not be afraid of. Food is so magnificent. And Craig is an amazing cook. And to make full circle, to tell you about our relationship, one night we're falling asleep and I'm thinking about Sex and the City and the characters and what am I going to do with Carrie? And out of nowhere, the lights are out. He says, what about those potatoes I made last week? And I thought, yeah. Oh, those were something. And that's what he's thinking about.
Yeah.
Thank God somebody's thinking about something real.
Yes, exactly. And here we are talking about the things that are real in our lives. And we both are so fortunate that we have reality in our lives with our mates.
Oh my God!
And
magical reality.
Yeah, magical reality. And Michael, I'm going to conclude by thanking you. I can't tell you how much this has meant to me to have this conversation, and how wonderful it is to listen to you transform your life from your childhood through to today, where you eat everything.
I eat everything. I'm telling you, those tears in the potatoes pay off.
Pay off.
They do.
Michael Patrick King. Michael Patrick King, thank you, my friend.
Chris, my friend, my pleasure.